I am pleased to present this motion for a number of reasons, but particularly because it's the main reason I was elected into this place, and I would like to see it's one of the most important jobs I need to do here. Many of you are unaware of the history behind the motion, so let me give you just a brief overview of what's happened over the last 5 years. The massive changes to the industry, make no mistake, was to accommodate Uber. Let me just tell you what's happened about Uber around the world. There's a furphy going on in this country that Uber's taking over everything. That is simply untrue. It is not a knight in shining armour that is taking over the world and providing quality, good value service to its customers. In the 10 years they've been operating, they haven't been able to turn a profit. A report from Goldman Sachs to its investors in relation to Uber in the US, they don't believe Uber will turn a profit till 2030, and then only if driverless cars become available. How incredibly optimistic. Uber has been forced to sell its business in Russia, China, Southeast Asia, Singapore and Hong Kong, where they take a small shareholding in those businesses. They have pulled out. Their UberX model, what they call Uber Pop in Europe, is out of Germany, Italy, Greece, France, Spain and Portugal. They have gone back into some of those jurisdictions, but then complying with the local laws. The European Union has ruled that Uber is a taxi service and should be treated as such. In the past few weeks, tribunals in Paris have ruled that Uber drivers are actually employees. In London, Uber has lost a number of appeals against having drivers classified as employees. London is also a jurisdiction where Uber has had its licence counts for appalling behaviour and records of assault against customers. Uber doesn't want employees because the ruling of an employee makes the Uber model unviable. In New York City, they have set a minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers at $17 an hour. Also, New York City has applied caps on the number of vehicles on the road because of the oversupply of Ubers, is pulling people off the public transport systems and causing major congestion issues in New York City. We're already seeing serious congestion issues in Melbourne CBD, with vehicles hovering around like seagulls looking for a cold chip at the beach. Prior to the emergence of the illegal rideshare service Uber, taxi and hire car operators and drivers and licence holders were operating lawfully under previous regulatory environment. There was no restrictions on the number of commercial passenger vehicles entering the market. When Uber launched into Australia in 2014, there was a legitimate avenues for Uber and their drivers to lawfully purchase CPV licences and embark on business venture, but they chose not to. They were supported and encouraged to drive without CPV licences by Uber. In fact, Uber was paying for infringement notices for those caught driving illegally. So they unlawfully competed in the market from 2014 until August 2017, when changes to legislation paved the way for Uber workforce to enter the industry with minimal licensing costs. In this time, Uber used a predatory pricing model to gain market share to penetrate the market. The taxi industry was hamstrung, bound by a regulated meter fares determined by the Essential Services Commission. The taxi industry taxis could not legally compete on price to foil any advanced competition. As a driver myself, my business was severely harmed and my income dropped 30 to 40%. Prior to August 2017, both taxis and hire cars fell under highly regulated commercial passenger vehicle licensing conditions. Hire car licences were non-assignable and could be purchased directly from the regulator, formerly known as the TSC, the Taxi Services Commission, now known as Commercial Passenger Vehicles Victoria, for a one-off fee of $40,000. However, the cost of legitimate entry into the industry did not suit Uber or their underlying business model, which relies on a constant stream of transitory workers who would otherwise be reluctant to invest in capital. How many Uber drivers invested $40,000? I guess none. Uber was certainly not offering to pay the fee. Taxi licences, on the other hand, fell into two general categories: perpetual licences and non-transferable annual licences. There were approximately 3,500 perpetual licences in circulation in Victoria, with the remaining licences actually owned by the Victorian government, which they leased out up to $23,000 per annum. In fact, the Victorian government was the largest holder of taxi licences with around 2,000 licences. Perpetual licences could be transferred on the open market and were able to be privately leased with the going rate of around $2,000 per calendar month, pegged by the cost of annual government permits. Leasing had advantage of the cost could be paid monthly rather than upfront, which made it less of a burden to enter the market. Approximately 70% of perpetual licences were leased, providing with a revenue stream to service loans, covering living expenses, and to provide an income in retirement. Over time, these perpetual taxi licences acquired value. Market forces scarcity means a rise in value. Through the initiation of the Fells inquiry in 2011, the value of the perpetual licence had increased to around $500,000, with an annual return around $30,000 if they were leased. After implementation of the Fells reforms, the government introduced an unlimited supply of annual permits at $23,000 per annum, and the value of licence fell to around $300,000. These licences given exclusive business rights in the commercial passenger vehicle industry, yet they become irrelevant because the laws protecting those rights were being ignored. Deregulation. In August 2017, when a bill passed in this place to deregulate the industry, all existing taxi and hire car licences were revoked and replaced with a single annual permit priced at $53.80. In compensation, the government offered an arbitrary transition package of $100,000 for the first taxi licence and $50,000 for a maximum of 3, more held under a single entity. Nothing if you've worked hard all your life and you own more. Similarly, hire car licence were paid $25,000 for the first and $12,500 for the up 3 more. Those still facing financial hardship were offered a means-tested fairness fund. Thousands, including myself, were so disheartened by the whole process that we didn't even bother to apply. There's been many precedents of government's licence buyouts or structural adjustment packages where the government has bought back each and every licence at a set price determined independently. The fishing industry is but one example. There's been some debate whether taxi licences were actually property. There is no debate. In Federal Commissions of Taxation versus Murray, 1998, 193 CLR 605, the majority of the High Court wrote that the licence is property. A taxi licence is a valuable item of property because it has an economic potential, it allows its holder to conduct a profitable business, and it may be sold or leased for reward for a third party. A taxi licence was considered an income-bearing property and could be held as collateral against borrowings within the banking sector. Many were included in our superannuation and investment funds, so by revoking those licences without due compensation, the government has left many people in significant financial hardship. I myself among many who are paying off loans for a licence that we no longer own from an income no longer derived from the licence itself. Many who established themselves as self-funded retirees have found themselves seeking a pension and selling their homes. The devastation and financial ramifications are far-reaching. I just want to talk about the regulator. The taxi and hire car industry has completely lost confidence in the regulator. We made the mistake of believing that because we are doing everything correct, we are meeting our legal obligations, that we would be protected from others breaking the law. That simply didn't happen. This has brought about 2 serious court cases. There is a legal action in the Supreme Court for the last 12 months with the regulator, with a taxi group, which is ongoing. I have to declare my interest in the second one, because I brought the legal action to Maurice Blackburn along with my colleague Andre Baruch, and that class action is going to be the largest class action this country's ever seen. At this stage we've got 4,500 registrants, and it'll probably double whatever else we've seen previously. The point that we'd like to make about with what's happened here in Victoria is that no other state or territory has compulsory revoked the licences. None. We can't find anywhere else on the planet where this action has happened either. Over $1 billion in property has been seized, stripping private property from people to well-accommodate multinational corporation reluctant to their workforce to invest in business capital was unheard of until now. Let's not beat about the bush. These changes to accommodate Uber, and it wasn't fair. Every state and territory in Australia is struggling with how to accommodate new technology and compensate their existing industry. We acknowledge the Andrews government has paid in excess of $400 million to the taxi and hire car industry through transition payments and fairness fund, but there is certainly a view in the industry that we thank them for their deposit. They'll be looking for the balance of their payment for their property which has been seized. We now seek payment for the balance. Income. Not only is this about licence values, it's all about ability for drivers to have an income. And I speak to all drivers, taxi drivers and our new CPV licence holders are all struggling. Since the taxi reforms, taxi drivers, generally speaking, earn below the living wage, as low as $10 an hour. They earn no sick pay, no superannuation, they have no holiday pay, and there's questions about where they work, where they have workers' compensation. There is no award to protect them. In 2019, we have to ask ourselves, as a society, how do we think this is acceptable when this would be unacceptable to the vast majority of Victorians? I think it's a classic case of unintended consequences. In an effort to be seen as a progressive state, Victoria jumped on the new shiny new technology and without enough due consideration for the effects it would have on existing established industry. It is no longer possible to build a career as a commercial passenger vehicle operator because the industry is flooded with a transient and disgruntled workforce. There are now 11,876 cabs on our streets. There are over 50,192 cars, including the original hire car services, and newcomers Uber, Didi, Ola and GoCatch. We are also estimate there's over 92,000 drivers out there scratching for work. CPV drivers are truly the bottom of the food chain. For consumers on the surface, it seems a fantastic situation. Oversupply in a free market leads to a huge drop in pricing. It's now cheap to split a ride to the city between a few friends, but cheap rides come at a cost, and it's usually those working in it. We now have a commercial passenger vehicle that is essentially self-regulated. While previous industry and somewhat overprescribed, there is a long history of introducing these regulations to ensure safety for both passengers and drivers. Touting has been made legal. Before deregulation, it was illegal for drivers to approach people and offer them for rides. Now we find drivers at airports, at major events, Grand Prix, the tennis, MCG, up and down Collins Street, offering rides with often the unspoken understanding they are legitimate drivers. This is a serious safety issue. How do you know you're actually getting into a legitimate vehicle? We also hear reports we hear the reports of sinister individuals masquerading as rideshare drivers and picking up passengers who are not paying too attention to the car they have stepped into. Mr. President, by deregulating the industry, the government has opened up a Pandora's box. This is just a tip of an iceberg of issues that we see in an industry that is now economically, socially and environmentally unsustainable. I accept that the industry has evolved. We are all in this together now, taxis, hire cars, and despite the bad blood of the past 5 years, we now have to work together to fix the problems we now face. The former taxi and hire car industry deserves proper compensation. All drivers deserve to work in an industry where they can earn a fair wage and fair benefits for their effort. And the public deserve a safe and reliable commercial passenger service vehicle. I commend this motion.